Welcome to night 33 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush, everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore following the slow footsteps of medieval monks creating sacred hand-painted scripts. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently without urgency and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. The monastery stood quietly among low hills that rolled gently across the countryside, their soft slopes covered in grass that moved slowly with the wind. From a distance, the buildings seemed almost part of the land itself, their stone walls carrying the pale color of the surrounding earth. Paths worn smooth by many years of footsteps curved through the fields, eventually leading to the outer gate where travelers sometimes arrived, though not often and never in great numbers. Most days passed without interruption. Morning light usually came slowly over the hills, touching the roofs of the monastery before it reached the ground below. In the early hours, when the world was still cool and quiet, a faint bell could sometimes be heard drifting through the air. Its tone was not loud, but steady and familiar, echoing gently between the stone buildings. Within those walls lived a small community of monks whose lives followed a rhythm that changed very little from one day to the next. The monastery itself had been standing for many years. Its thick stone walls had been raised slowly by patient hands, block by block, long before most of the monks living there had arrived. Moss had begun to settle in the cracks between the stones, and vines occasionally traced soft lines across the outer walls. Wooden doors, darkened by age, opened into quiet hallways that smelled faintly of old wood, wax, and the slow passing of time. Inside the courtyard, a small garden grew in careful rows. Herbs filled narrow beds of soil, their leaves carrying soft scents that rose gently in the warmer hours of the day. Sage, thyme, and other simple plants were tended quietly by the monks who worked there. The garden was not large, but it was enough. The monks moved through it without hurry, watering the soil or trimming a branch when needed. Beyond the garden stood the main buildings of the monastery, arranged around the courtyard in a calm and ordered pattern. A narrow cloister walkway ran along the inner walls, its stone floor worn smooth by centuries of quiet steps. Tall arches opened toward the garden, allowing light and fresh air to drift through the shaded corridor. In the early morning, soft light would fall through these arches and stretch across the ground in long shapes that slowly shifted as the sun moved across the sky. The monks passed through this corridor many times each day. Their robes brushed softly against the stone as they walked, their movements slow and deliberate. There was rarely any need to hurry. The hours of the day were already arranged in a quiet sequence that everyone understood. Prayer, work, study, rest. These parts of the day returned again and again, forming a rhythm that carried the community forward without the need for constant decision or change. Beyond the cloister were the rooms where the monks lived and worked. Some rooms were small and simple, holding little more than a wooden bed and a narrow table. Others served the shared needs of the monastery. A kitchen where bread and simple meals were prepared. A storeroom where grains and dried herbs were kept. A small chapel where candles burned softly even in the quietest hours. And somewhere within the walls, tucked into one of the quieter wings of the building, there existed another room whose purpose was more patient still. But from the courtyard, this room could not yet be seen. Instead, the courtyard offered only gentle hints of the life unfolding within the monastery. A wooden bucket resting beside a well. A stack of firewood arranged carefully against a wall. A broom leaning quietly in the corner where the stone path met the garden soil. Small signs of daily routines. As the sun climbed higher during the day, light would begin to warm the courtyard stones. Shadows shortened and the air carried the faint sounds of movement within the surrounding rooms. The monks moved through their tasks with quiet familiarity, rarely raising their voices and often speaking only when necessary. The monastery was not a place of silence in the strictest sense. There were always small sounds. The creaking of a wooden door opening somewhere down a hallway. The distant turning of a mill wheel in the nearby stream. the soft flutter of birds settling on the roof tiles before lifting again into the sky. Yet these sounds never disturbed the calm that seemed to rest over the buildings. Instead, they blended into the quiet rhythm of the place, as natural as the wind passing through the fields beyond the walls. From time to time, a traveler might approach along the narrow path that wound through the hills. Perhaps a messenger carrying a letter from another monastery. Perhaps a pilgrim walking a long road across the countryside. The wooden gate would open slowly, and the visitor would be welcomed inside. But even these moments arrived gently and passed just as quietly. Most days belonged entirely to the steady life of the monks themselves. The afternoon light would gradually soften, drifting across the courtyard stones before slipping behind the roofs. Shadows would grow longer again, reaching across the garden beds and along the cloister floor. Eventually evening would begin to settle over the hills. The fields beyond the monastery would turn darker shades of green and gray as the last light faded from the sky. One by one, candles and small lamps would begin to glow within the monastery windows. From the outside, the building would appear calm and still, its quiet windows shining softly against the darkening landscape. Inside, however, the routines of the monks continued. Some would prepare simple meals. Others would walk slowly through the cloister corridors. A few might sit in quiet study within the small rooms scattered along the stone hallways. And in one particular part of the monastery, behind a wooden door that opened into a long room filled with desks and candles, another kind of work would unfold. It was work that required patience rather than strength. Work that moved slowly, often one careful motion at a time. The monks who entered that room did not carry tools for fields or kitchens. Instead, they carried small objects that fit easily in the hand. Feathers shaped carefully into writing quills. Small knives. Bottles of dark ink. There, within that quiet space, the slow creation of manuscripts would begin. But for now, the monastery remained at rest within the hills, its stone walls holding the steady rhythm of the day. The courtyard garden rested beneath the soft evening air, and the cloister paths waited quietly for the next set of footsteps to pass along their worn surfaces. Somewhere beyond those corridors, a different room waited in silence. A room where wooden desks stood side by side beneath dim candlelight. A room where the careful work of writing and copying sacred texts would unfold slowly over many hours, sometimes over many years. And as the night settled gently over the monastery and the hills beyond, the quiet path that led into that room would soon be followed. Beyond the quiet courtyard and the familiar paths of the cloister lay a room that few outside the monastery would ever see. It was not large, and its doorway was plain, made from thick wooden boards darkened by years of careful use. The door opened slowly and without ceremony, revealing a long chamber where the air carried the faint scent of wax, parchment, and ink. This was the scriptorium. Within its walls, the sounds of the monastery changed. The footsteps of the cloister faded behind the door, replaced by softer movements and quieter rhythms. Here the passing of time felt different, measured not by bells or the turning of daylight but by the patient work of hands and the slow filling of pages. Along the length of the room stood several wooden desks, each placed near a small source of light. During the day, narrow windows allowed pale daylight to fall across the desks in gentle rectangles. At other times, candles provided a warm glow that rested softly on parchment and wood. The desks themselves were simple but carefully made. Their surfaces carried faint marks left by many years of use. Small grooves and scratches traced quiet histories across the wood, reminders of countless pages that had once rested there. Each desk held only a few objects. A sheet of parchment, carefully smoothed. A quill resting beside a small pot of dark ink. Occasionally a small knife, used to shape the feather tip or to gently scrape away a mistake. These items were not arranged with strict precision, yet they always returned to roughly the same places, as though guided by habit rather than instruction. The monks who worked in the scriptorium entered the room without haste. Their robes moved softly as they walked, and their steps were slow enough that the wooden floor rarely made more than a faint sound. Some carried small bundles of parchment. Others brought tools wrapped in cloth to keep them clean and safe. When each monk reached his desk, he would settle into the quiet rhythm of the room. There was no signal to begin. No spoken command. Instead, the work began as naturally as breathing. One monk would lift a quill and dip it lightly into ink. Another would adjust the parchment before him, aligning it gently with the edge of the desk. A third might pause for a moment, looking over the lines already written on a page that had taken many days to complete. Soon the scriptorium filled with a sound so soft that it could easily be missed by someone unfamiliar with the room. The faint scratching of quills moving across parchment. It was a quiet sound, almost like the gentle brushing of leaves against one another in a slow wind. Sometimes several quills moved at once, their soft strokes forming a steady background rhythm. At other times only one monk wrote while the others paused to rest their hands or prepare their tools. Nothing in the room demanded urgency. The monks understood that the work before them would take time. Often far more time than a single day could offer. A manuscript might require weeks of steady writing, sometimes months. Occasionally it would take even longer. But this was not seen as a burden. The slow pace was simply part of the task itself. Each line of writing required careful attention. The shapes of the letters had been practiced many times before, and the monks carried those forms in memory, yet each new page still asked for patience. The quill needed to be held at just the right angle. The ink had to flow smoothly without spreading too far across the parchment. Even the smallest movement could change the shape of a letter. For this reason, the monks worked quietly and steadily, allowing their hands to move with calm precision. When a line of text reached the edge of the page, the quill would lift gently, pause for a moment above the parchment, and then return to begin the next line below. Outside the scriptorium, the day continued to unfold. Sunlight moved slowly across the monastery courtyard. The garden herbs shifted gently in the wind. Bells marked the hours, though their sound reached the scriptorium only faintly through thick stone walls. Inside the room, however, the atmosphere remained constant. Light shifted gradually across the desks as the day progressed, but the quiet rhythm of the work rarely changed. A monk might lean slightly forward as he wrote, or sit back for a moment to rest his hand. Another might adjust the position of his parchment so that the next lines could be written more comfortably. These movements were small and unhurried. Occasionally a monk would rise from his desk and walk slowly along the room, perhaps to retrieve another sheet of parchment or to consult a text resting on a nearby table. His footsteps remained soft, careful not to disturb the stillness shared by the others. In one corner of the room, several manuscripts rested together in neat stacks. Some were nearly complete, their pages already filled with rows of carefully shaped letters. Others were only beginning, their first lines standing alone on otherwise empty parchment. Each manuscript carried its own quiet journey. The texts being copied had often traveled far before reaching the monastery. Some had been brought by travelers or scholars. Others had arrived from neighboring monasteries where similar work was being done. But once they entered the scriptorium, their movements slowed. Here the words were carefully transferred from one page to another, letter by letter, line by line. The process required patience rather than speed, and the monks accepted this naturally. Their task was not to hurry the words forward but simply to carry them across the page with care. The candles burned steadily throughout the room, their small flames moving gently with the faint currents of air that drifted through the chamber. Their light cast warm circles across the desks, leaving the outer edges of the room in soft shadow. Occasionally the flame of a candle would flicker slightly, causing the shadows to shift across the wooden beams of the ceiling. Dust moved slowly through these beams of light, floating quietly in the still air. For the monks, these subtle movements were part of the familiar environment of the scriptorium. The changing light, the quiet scratching of quills, the slow passing of hours, all blended into a steady rhythm that guided their work. Sometimes a monk would pause, lifting the quill from the parchment to examine the lines already written. The letters rested calmly across the page, their shapes forming rows that moved steadily from margin to margin. If the ink had dried well, the monk might continue writing immediately. If a small error appeared, he would reach for the small knife resting on the desk. With gentle care, the blade could scrape away the thinnest layer of parchment, removing the mistake without tearing the page. Once the surface had been smoothed again, the writing could continue as though the error had never existed. These small corrections were accepted quietly. No page was expected to be perfect on the first attempt. The work was long and the hands that performed it were human. Patience was simply part of the process. As the day moved forward, more pages slowly filled with lines of writing. The manuscripts began to grow thicker, their stacks of parchment increasing one sheet at a time. Yet the room itself remained calm and unchanged, its wooden desks standing quietly beneath the soft light of candles and windows. Eventually, as the hours passed, the pace of writing would slow. Hands would rest for a while. Quills would be set gently aside. The monks might sit in quiet stillness for a few moments before returning to their work. The scriptorium did not demand constant movement. Instead, it allowed space for pauses, for reflection, for the steady preparation that each new page required. Before another line could be written, the parchment itself needed careful attention. And not every sheet that entered the scriptorium arrived ready for ink. Some had traveled through a much longer process before reaching these desks, passing through other rooms and other hands within the monastery. Places where the parchment had first been shaped, stretched, and prepared so that it could eventually receive the careful lines of writing that now filled the quiet room. The parchment sheets, once prepared, rested gently on the wooden desks, their surfaces smooth and pale, waiting for the careful touch of the quill. Each sheet had been shaped long before, stretched and dried until it held a quiet firmness, yet remained supple enough to receive ink without strain. The room was still, filled with the faint scent of parchment and candle wax, and the monks moved through it with soft, deliberate motions. Even the smallest sound, the gentle scratch of a knife against the edge of a page, or the whisper of a quill dipping into ink, blended seamlessly with the ambient quiet, as though the room itself encouraged slow, mindful attention. Some parchment sheets lay flat, untouched, while others carried the beginnings of letters, faint impressions of ink forming shapes that would one day flow across the page. The edges were sometimes slightly uneven, evidence of careful trimming, but these minor imperfections were embraced, a part of the natural rhythm of creation. The monks handled each sheet with hands that had grown familiar with the textures and weight of the material, fingers tracing lightly over its surface before beginning the next gentle task. The scriptorium was a space of soft light and shadow. Candles flickered slowly, sending gentle movements across the rough stone walls and polished wood desks. Occasionally, pale daylight filtered in through the high windows, brushing the edges of the parchment with a subtle glow. Dust motes drifted lazily through these beams of light, hovering over the manuscripts as if to watch the quiet unfolding of careful work. The warmth from the candle flames mingled with the coolness of the stone, creating an atmosphere that was neither heavy nor cold, but comfortably suspended in stillness. The monks themselves moved in a rhythm dictated by patience rather than time. One monk would lift a sheet, aligning it carefully along the grain of the desk. His hands worked without haste, smoothing out slight creases, ensuring the page lay flat before the first stroke of the quill. Another might pass quietly behind him, carrying a tray of small bowls filled with pigments, the colors muted yet rich, resting in earthy tones that seemed to hum softly under the candlelight. Each pigment was chosen not for haste but for precision, for the gentle unfolding of color that would later grace the manuscript pages. Some sheets required more preparation than others. They might have been shaped and dried in earlier rooms, stretched across frames and left to settle over hours or even days. A slight bump or wrinkle could be corrected by careful, slow pressure from the monk's fingers, and sometimes a faint sheen appeared across the parchment as the surface was made ready for ink. Every adjustment was small, almost imperceptible, yet crucial to the gentle rhythm of creation. The quills themselves rested nearby, trimmed and shaped with soft knives that allowed the tip to hold just the right amount of ink. Some quills were worn from years of use, their shafts smooth and faintly polished from repeated handling. Others were newer, still slightly rough to the touch, yet equally ready to perform their task when dipped into the dark ink. The monks handled these tools with familiarity, lifting and setting them down in movements that were calm and deliberate, in harmony with the slow unfolding of their work. Throughout the room there was a sense of continuity. Pages moved from one desk to another, quills were passed gently from hand to hand, and pigments were shared in small, unobtrusive motions. Nothing demanded sudden attention and nothing arrived too quickly. Each action flowed naturally into the next, forming a quiet choreography of preparation and care. Even as one monk adjusted the placement of a sheet, another might pause to examine the edges of parchment that had just been trimmed, ensuring that it rested smoothly, ready to receive the first traces of ink. The light shifted gradually as the day progressed. Pale beams moved across the room, touching the parchment and desks in long, gentle strokes. Candles flickered in response, casting soft shadows across the floor and walls. These movements were subtle, unnoticed by the casual observer, but they contributed to the gentle rhythm of the room. Each shadow, each touch of light, became part of the steady environment that encouraged concentration without strain. In some corners of the scriptorium, stacks of prepared parchment waited patiently. Some were bound together loosely with soft cloth ties, while others rested in simple wooden trays. Their surfaces were clean and quiet, unmarked, holding a promise of careful work yet to come. The monks approached these stacks slowly, selecting a sheet only when they were ready, their movements unhurried, measured, and deliberate. A faint draft sometimes stirred the air within the scriptorium, enough to cause the tiniest ripple across the edges of a sheet or the gentle swaying of a candle flame. Yet even these small currents of air felt part of the natural rhythm, adding to the serene environment rather than disturbing it. Every movement in the room, whether intentional or subtle, was absorbed into the steady flow of activity that defined the scriptorium. The arrangement of desks, parchment, and tools created a landscape within the room. Each area had its purpose, each surface a story of past use and careful attention. The monks moved through this landscape with quiet awareness, their hands guiding sheets of parchment, quills, and pigments through the tasks at hand. Even when a monk paused for a moment, lifting his hands away from the desk, the room remained in a gentle, continuous state of calm, as if waiting for the next soft movement. As afternoon light began to soften into evening, the room took on a slightly warmer hue. Shadows stretched across the desks and walls, mingling with the soft glow of the candles that now dominated the illumination. The parchment seemed to hold a faint reflection of this light, and the pigments, though not yet applied, rested in their bowls with subtle richness, hinting at colors that would one day grace the manuscripts. The monks continued their preparation, hands moving slowly and deliberately, bringing each sheet to readiness with care and attention. Outside the scriptorium, the sounds of the monastery remained faintly present. The occasional footstep along the cloister floor, the soft rustle of leaves from the courtyard garden, the distant toll of a bell, all merged into a background that emphasized the quiet within the scriptorium rather than intruding upon it. The room itself seemed slightly removed from the passing of time, holding a gentle suspension that allowed patience to take its natural course. Each sheet of parchment, once prepared, carried within it the possibility of countless lines of writing. The monks did not rush this transformation. They understood that the careful shaping and smoothing of the material were as important as the words that would eventually appear. In this way, the work of preparation became a quiet ritual, a series of deliberate gestures that honored the materials and the task itself. Even as evening deepened, the room maintained its gentle rhythm. The monks' movements slowed slightly, as if responding to the softening light and the subtle passage of hours. Yet no sense of urgency entered the space. There was only the ongoing preparation, the careful handling of parchment and tools, the patient arrangement of pigments, and the quiet expectation of work yet to come. The scriptorium was alive with anticipation, though it was a quiet and gentle life. Every sheet, every quill, every bowl of pigment participated in a slow, continuous process that extended the rhythm of the monastery into this small, secluded room. And as the last beams of light outside the windows faded, the parchment lay ready, quietly awaiting the next stage in its long journey toward becoming a manuscript. As the prepared sheets of parchment rested across the desks, the scriptorium slowly became a space of quiet expectation. The candles cast gentle pools of light, illuminating the edges of each sheet and the smooth surfaces of the desks. Shadows moved gradually along the walls and beams as the evening air stirred softly, carrying the faint scent of wax, ink, and the slight dryness of the parchment itself. The monks moved among the desks with measured steps, selecting the sheets they would work on next, each action careful and deliberate, guided by the natural rhythm of the room rather than any urgent command. One monk reached for a pale sheet, aligning it carefully with the edge of his desk. His fingers traced the grain of the parchment, feeling the subtle texture and checking for any remaining irregularities. Once satisfied, he picked up a quill, its tip sharp and ready, and dipped it lightly into the dark ink. The ink absorbed into the nib slowly, carrying only a whisper of moisture that would soon flow onto the parchment surface. Each movement was precise but unhurried, the hand gliding smoothly as it prepared to trace the first gentle lines. Nearby, another monk arranged his pigments in shallow bowls, the muted colors resting in quiet order. Soft blues, warm ochres, gentle reds, and earthy greens waited to be applied to the manuscript pages. Each bowl was set with care, ensuring that the colors would remain unmixed and ready for delicate use. He tested the tip of a brush in the faint light, observing how the pigment flowed and considering which part of the page might next receive its soft touch. The room was filled with subtle motion, each monk performing small tasks in harmony with one another. A sheet was adjusted slightly, a quill lifted and lowered with careful intent, a pigment brush moved gently across a mixing palette. None of these actions demanded haste. Each was a continuation of the previous motion, a steady unfolding of work that required only attention and patience. Light shifted gradually from the tall windows, the pale evening sun retreating behind the distant hills. Candles flickered more prominently, their soft flames sending gentle reflections across the parchment and wood. Dust particles drifted lazily through the air, illuminated in small shafts of light that made them appear to float in slow, deliberate arcs. These tiny movements were part of the rhythm of the room, subtle markers of time passing without urgency or notice. As the monks began to write, the first letters appeared on the blank pages. The quills scratched softly, forming delicate shapes that would eventually flow into continuous lines of text. Each stroke was measured, the ink absorbing into the parchment without smudging. Occasionally, a monk paused, lifting the quill to observe the consistency of the letters, ensuring that the forms were steady and true. The slow repetition of letters, line after line, created a quiet harmony that pervaded the room. In the corners of the scriptorium, small stacks of partially completed sheets waited patiently. Some carried just a few lines, while others had more extensive passages, each reflecting hours of careful labor. These sheets were treated with equal respect, handled softly, and arranged with thought to maintain order within the quiet space. The monks understood that every page, regardless of how much had been written upon it, contributed equally to the calm rhythm of creation. Occasionally, a monk would move to a nearby table to retrieve another tool or a fresh sheet of parchment. The steps were soft, almost silent, the motions blending seamlessly into the environment. The room's stillness embraced these minor movements, making them appear part of a gentle choreography. Even when multiple monks moved simultaneously, their actions did not disturb the atmosphere. Instead, they enhanced the sense of ongoing, measured activity. As the evening deepened, the scriptorium seemed to exist apart from the rest of the monastery. The distant sounds of the courtyard, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint creak of a door, the occasional toll of a bell, drifted through the thick stone walls, but they did not intrude. The room maintained its own quiet pulse, a rhythm defined by slow preparation, careful motion, and the steady unfolding of letters on parchment. Some pages required corrections. When a small line was misaligned or a mark appeared where it should not, the monks used their knives with gentle precision, scraping away thin layers of parchment to erase the imperfection. These adjustments were slow and deliberate, the quill returning to the page only after the surface had been smoothed. Such actions were common and expected, yet they were performed with the same calm attention as the initial writing, part of the continuous flow rather than an interruption. The gentle scratch of quills, the soft brushing of hands against parchment, and the muted flicker of candlelight combined to create a serene environment. Each monk's movements echoed the others, forming a quiet synchrony across the room. No voice was needed, the work itself dictated the pace, and each monk's attention was drawn naturally to the rhythm of the moment. In one corner, a small stack of colored pigments caught the candlelight, revealing their muted vibrancy. A brush was lifted and applied to a page, the pigment settling softly into a designated shape. The motion was slow and controlled, the color blending seamlessly with the blank surface. These subtle applications added dimension to the manuscripts, introducing gentle tones without ever overwhelming the soft balance of the scriptorium. The monks did not speak of time. They moved from one task to the next guided by the natural passage of light, by the careful readiness of parchment, by the quiet needs of the manuscripts themselves. Each sheet brought with it the promise of a slow and deliberate journey, each stroke of ink a continuation of the patient work that had begun long before the day and would continue long after it. As night approached, the shadows grew deeper, folding around the desks and manuscript stacks. Candlelight became the primary illumination, casting a soft golden glow over the room. The air remained calm, carrying only the faintest movement of dust and warmth from the flames. The monks' hands moved steadily, their eyes tracing letters and shapes with quiet concentration. There was no rush, no urgency, no expectation beyond the natural unfolding of their task. Even as the hours lengthened, the room retained its tranquil cadence. Pages were turned, quills lifted and dipped, pigments applied gently, and the slow rhythm of creation continued without interruption. Each action, no matter how minor, contributed to a larger pattern of patience and care, creating a space where work and stillness existed together harmoniously. Outside, the courtyard had faded into a gentle darkness. The garden was quiet, the stone paths resting under the muted light of the moon. Within the scriptorium, the monks continued their careful preparations, bringing each sheet, quill, and pigment into readiness for the next line of delicate writing. The room existed in a state suspended between evening and night, filled with soft light, soft motion, and the quiet persistence of meticulous attention. The soft candlelight now filled the scriptorium more fully, casting long, gentle shadows across the desks and manuscript stacks. The evening had deepened, and the quiet rhythm of preparation subtly shifted, as though the room itself had noticed the fading of daylight. The monks continued their work with steady, unhurried hands, the quills moving carefully across the smooth, pale parchment that had been prepared with such care. Each stroke of ink, each gentle placement of pigment, contributed to the slow unfolding of the manuscripts, and the atmosphere remained suspended in calm continuity. Some monks leaned closer to their work, eyes tracing the lines already written and anticipating the gentle arrival of the next letters. Their hands moved with quiet deliberation, guiding the quills across the page in motions both practiced and precise. The parchment, now fully prepared and resting smoothly upon the desks, seemed almost to embrace the ink as it formed delicate, carefully shaped letters. The process was rhythmic, soft, and absorbing, as if time itself had slowed within the scriptorium to match the deliberate pace of the monks' motions. A small tray of pigments rested nearby, untouched for a brief moment, until a brush was lifted with careful intent. The muted reds, ochres, and soft blues of the pigments blended gently into the manuscript's initial illustrations, each brushstroke slow and considered. The pigments spread evenly across the page, merging with the text to create subtle accents that would guide the eye without disturbing the quiet harmony of the work. Even the smallest movement of the brush seemed to ripple softly through the space, unnoticed except by those who moved with the same rhythm. The scent of wax from the candles mingled faintly with the odor of ink and parchment, creating an environment that was warm and familiar. Small drafts of air drifted through the room, just enough to make the candle flames flicker and the dust motes drift lazily through the shafts of light. These gentle currents seemed almost deliberate, as if the room had its own slow pulse, moving in harmony with the monk's work and the natural rhythm of time. Some manuscripts were now more advanced, their pages carrying rows of letters that had grown steadily over the hours. Each page seemed to hold its own quiet story, the text and pigments forming subtle narratives that emerged slowly and patiently. The monks approached these pages with care, occasionally pausing to lift the quill and observe their progress, ensuring that each line remained steady and precise. Any small imperfections were corrected with delicate scraping, the ink carefully adjusted, and the flow of the work continued uninterrupted. Across the room, a monk reached for a fresh sheet, its surface still untouched, smooth and waiting. He aligned it gently with the grain of the desk, feeling its subtle texture under his fingertips before beginning the next line of writing. Another monk picked up a quill and dipped it lightly into the ink, watching as a faint drop clung to the tip before moving toward the page. The actions were slow and deliberate, creating a soft, ongoing rhythm that carried through the scriptorium. The interplay of light, shadow, and movement gave the room a steady sense of calm. Candles flickered gently, casting elongated shapes across the stone walls and wooden beams, while the pale moonlight that filtered through the high windows added a cool contrast to the warm glow within. Dust motes, caught between these layers of light, drifted in almost imperceptible patterns, moving slowly as though in sync with the monk's motions. Every element of the room, the light, the scent, the subtle movements, combined into a tranquil environment, conducive to the patient work unfolding within it. The rhythm of the room extended to every minor detail. Quills were lifted and lowered with a gentle precision, parchment was shifted slightly to maintain alignment, and brushes were guided carefully across small illustrations. The monks worked in a seamless coordination, each aware of the quiet presence of the others, yet absorbed entirely in their own tasks. There was no rush, no expectation, only the slow, deliberate process of shaping letters, lines, and pigments with care. The manuscripts themselves seemed to absorb this calm. Pages that had been once blank now bore the soft weight of ink, the subtle coloration of pigments, and the faint impressions of careful handling. Even as more pages were prepared and set aside for later work, the sense of continuity remained. Each page was part of a larger, unhurried journey, moving from preparation to creation with patience and mindfulness. Occasionally, a monk would pause, resting his hand or lifting his gaze toward the high ceiling, where wooden beams met stone arches. Shadows played across the surfaces, lengthening and contracting as the candle flames flickered in response to the faint currents of air. These brief pauses were embraced, woven into the rhythm of the room rather than interrupting it. The scriptorium seemed to acknowledge these still moments, holding them gently within its quiet expanse. The evening continued its slow advance. Light and shadow shifted imperceptibly, the smell of candle wax softened further, and the faint rustle of parchment and movement of tools became the defining sounds of the space. Each monk moved with consistent care, dipping quills, arranging sheets, and applying pigments with the same attentive calm that had carried the work through the day. The room itself seemed timeless, a sanctuary where every action unfolded with a gentle, deliberate pace. As more manuscripts grew under their hands, the monks became aware of subtle transitions in the environment. A candle burned lower, sending a warmer, steadier glow across a particular desk. A moonbeam shifted across the floor, highlighting a small stack of prepared sheets. Each minor change was acknowledged softly, integrated naturally into the ongoing work without requiring haste or attention beyond observation. The steady unfolding of letters, pigments, and pages continued, creating an environment where patience and quiet diligence merged seamlessly. The room seemed to stretch beyond the immediate space, a domain where every sheet of parchment, every stroke of ink, every motion of brush contributed to a slow, continuous narrative. Nothing demanded urgency. Nothing intruded upon the gentle cadence of creation. The monks moved in harmony with their materials, their environment, and each other, producing manuscripts that carried the quiet patience of their work across every line and color. In this way, the preparation and early stages of writing flowed together. Sheets, quills, pigments, and hands moved almost in unison, forming a soft symphony of deliberate gestures and subtle transitions. The scriptorium, with its light, shadow, scent, and motion, held all these elements within a calm, enveloping rhythm. Time existed here in a measured, gentle form, marked by the slow accumulation of letters and images across the prepared pages. The manuscripts, now adorned with lines of ink and gentle strokes of pigment, rested upon the desks with a quiet dignity. The monks moved among them with slow, attentive gestures, adjusting a page here, lifting a quill there, as if each manuscript possessed a life of its own that required careful tending. Candlelight bathed the room in a warm, golden glow, illuminating the subtle textures of the parchment and the gentle colors of the pigments. Shadows shifted lazily across the stone walls and wooden beams, stretching and contracting in response to the flickering flames, while dust motes drifted through the light in languid, almost imperceptible arcs. One monk paused over a particularly large sheet, aligning it with meticulous care. His fingers smoothed the surface, feeling the faint resistance of the parchment beneath his touch. He lifted a quill, dipped it in ink, and let the tip meet the page with an understated grace. Each letter formed slowly, deliberately, the nib following the grain of the parchment as though guided by an invisible hand. Nearby, a small brush carried muted colors across a corner of an illuminated initial, the pigment blending softly with the text in a way that seemed almost like a gentle sigh. The rhythm of the room remained steady and calm. Sheets were exchanged, pigments shared, quills rested and lifted again. Each motion flowed seamlessly into the next, creating a slow, continuous choreography of work. Occasionally, a monk would pause to examine a line already drawn, lifting the quill to assess the consistency of the letters, adjusting ever so slightly. These small gestures, almost imperceptible to an observer, contributed to the harmonious tempo of the scriptorium, ensuring that each manuscript developed patiently and without disturbance. Light shifted gradually as the evening deepened. Moonlight now filtered through the high windows, pale and cool, contrasting subtly with the warm glow of the candles. The mixture of soft light and shadow gave the room a timeless quality, as though it existed outside of ordinary hours. The monks' movements, measured and gentle, became almost meditative in this environment, each hand guiding parchment, quill, and brush with attention that demanded nothing but quiet focus. The smell of candle wax, ink and aged parchment blended together, creating a subtle, enveloping atmosphere. Occasional drafts moved through the room, barely noticeable, causing the edges of some pages to lift slightly or a candle flame to flicker. Yet these movements were absorbed into the steady rhythm of the scriptorium rather than disrupting it. The monks' eyes followed their work with calm precision, and even as shadows lengthened and light softened, no hurry intruded upon the process. Some pages required careful layering of pigments. One monk, with a brush lightly dipped in soft blue, moved over a small motif along the edge of a page. Each stroke was slow, deliberate, and unhurried, allowing the color to settle gradually into the parchment surface. The subtle hues complemented the delicate text, and the combination created a quiet interplay between ink and pigment that was both soothing and measured. Each line, each stroke, contributed to the overall rhythm, a gentle harmony that carried across the room. Nearby, another monk gently lifted a small stack of completed sheets. He adjusted their alignment, ensuring the edges were even and the pages lay flat. His fingers lingered on the smooth surface, tracing the faint impressions of ink and pigment as if acknowledging the care that had gone into each one. The act was soft and unobtrusive, part of the ongoing flow rather than an interruption. Sheets were replaced on the desks, awaiting their next stage, each treated with the same quiet respect. The room's arrangement lent itself to the calm workflow. Desks, shelves, and trays were positioned to allow movement without interference, each element placed with consideration for space and ease. The monks navigated this landscape gently, their feet barely making a sound on the stone floors, their hands guiding materials with careful attention. Even minor adjustments, a slight tilt of a page, the repositioning of a quill, were executed with fluid grace, becoming part of the uninterrupted rhythm that defined the scriptorium. The quills themselves required occasional trimming. A monk would lift a sharp knife, carefully shaping the tip, testing its readiness with a delicate touch on the parchment's edge. The action was quiet, almost imperceptible, yet essential for maintaining the gentle flow of writing. Once prepared, the quill was returned to the hand, and the ink flowed anew, lines forming slowly and evenly across the page. In the corners of the room, stacks of manuscripts waited patiently. Some were partially filled with text, others bore intricate decorations along the margins, each sheet a quiet testament to the careful, continuous work of the monks. The order of these stacks was simple and deliberate, reflecting the calm organization of the scriptorium itself. The monks moved among them as needed, selecting sheets with measured intent, and returning each to its place after careful inspection. As night advanced, the room seemed to adopt a rhythm independent of the passing hours. The interplay of candlelight and moonlight created a constant, gentle change in illumination, enhancing the textures and colors of the manuscripts. Shadows deepened softly, lengthening across the desks and walls, while dust motes continued their slow, drifting paths. The monks' movements remained synchronized with this quiet transformation, their work flowing naturally with the gradual shifts in light. Occasionally, the monks would pause, lifting their hands from the page to rest, their eyes wandering to the high ceiling or the distant windows. These brief moments were absorbed into the calm cadence of the scriptorium, part of the unhurried pattern rather than a disruption. Even as the environment subtly changed, with light and shadow moving across surfaces and the ambient temperature cooling with the night air, the monks' focus remained gentle, steady, and uninterrupted. Each manuscript grew incrementally, its pages slowly filling with lines of ink and muted colors. The monks continued with care, adjusting the quills and brushes as needed, shifting pages to align properly, and observing each small detail with a calm attentiveness. Every motion, every touch, contributed to the quiet, continuous process of creation, allowing each manuscript to emerge gradually and harmoniously within the stillness of the room. The scriptorium, in its muted warmth and soft illumination, remained a sanctuary of patience. Each sheet, each quill, each pigment contributed to a slow and deliberate rhythm, where time seemed to stretch gently. Every movement flowed into the next, forming a seamless progression of preparation and creation, a quiet choreography that enveloped both monks and manuscripts in a calm, measured tranquility. The manuscripts now bore a quiet weight of accomplishment, their pages slowly filling with careful lines of ink and soft pigments, yet the scriptorium's atmosphere remained unhurried, as if the work itself insisted upon patience and gentleness. The monks continued their movements with measured grace, dipping quills into ink, adjusting pages, and lifting brushes with deliberate attention. Every gesture was soft and considered, each action flowing naturally from the one before, merging seamlessly into the steady cadence of the room. The subtle warmth of candlelight bathed the surfaces, highlighting the gentle texture of parchment and the muted tones of pigments, while moonlight filtered through the high windows, lending a cool, pale contrast that softened the edges of shadows and created a sense of calm equilibrium. Some monks lingered over particular passages, tracing letters with the tip of a quill, ensuring that each curve and stroke maintained a quiet consistency. Their hands moved with care, allowing the ink to flow naturally into the grooves of the parchment, while the pigments, applied with soft brushes, settled slowly into their intended spaces. Each stroke was a continuation of the one before, forming a subtle rhythm that extended across the scriptorium. In the gentle silence, the sound of quills scratching and brushes gliding created a soft, almost hypnotic harmony that wrapped the room in tranquility. The arrangement of the desks, manuscripts, and tools supported the slow, deliberate work. Sheets of parchment were aligned meticulously, brushes rested in shallow bowls of pigment, and quills were placed carefully to await the next line of text. The monks moved among these objects as if part of a gentle choreography, each step and reach synchronized with the quiet pulse of the environment. Occasional shifts in posture or a brief pause to examine a line of text were absorbed naturally into the rhythm, neither interrupting nor accelerating the work. Candle flames flickered slightly in the subtle drafts that moved through the scriptorium. Their warm light cast soft reflections across the wooden desks and stone floors, illuminating the gentle motions of the monks. Dust motes drifted through the illuminated shafts, tracing slow, silent arcs that echoed the deliberate pace of the work below. Every minor shift in light, every faint movement of air, became part of the steady, encompassing rhythm, blending seamlessly with the careful motions of quills and brushes across parchment. In one corner, a monk worked on a page with intricate embellishments. Soft blues and gentle ochres spread across the illuminated letters, merging with the black ink that traced the manuscript's text. Each application of pigment was slow and intentional, allowing the color to settle and interact naturally with the page. The act of adding these soft touches seemed to breathe life into the parchment without altering the calm balance of the scriptorium. The monk's hand moved almost meditatively, aware of the flow but not constrained by time, letting each stroke emerge organically from the one before. The scent of ink, wax, and parchment mingled in the cool evening air, subtle and unobtrusive, a gentle companion to the soft sounds of movement and creation. The monks remained immersed in their work, their attention focused but unhurried, guided only by the needs of the manuscripts and the quiet rhythm that governed the room. Every small motion, adjusting a page, dipping a quill, lifting a brush, was part of a continuous flow, seamless and calming, contributing to the overall harmony that filled the space. Light and shadow shifted gradually across the room, deepening the richness of textures on the parchment and highlighting the delicate pigments. The high windows allowed glimpses of the pale moonlight outside, faintly illuminating the stone walls and wooden beams. Shadows stretched across the floor and desks in soft, undulating patterns, moving imperceptibly with the flicker of candles and the gradual motion of the monks' hands. Even the most minor changes in illumination became part of the gentle choreography of the evening, unnoticed except as a slow, calming presence. The manuscripts themselves seemed to respond to the care invested in them. Pages once blank now carried quiet stories of text and illustration, each line and color the product of patience and attention. Stacks of completed sheets rested nearby, aligned carefully, waiting for the next stage of work. The monks' movements around these stacks were gentle and deliberate, touching each page lightly before returning it to its place, a slow acknowledgement of the effort embedded in every line. Throughout the scriptorium, the rhythm of creation unfolded seamlessly. Quills were lifted and lowered, brushes glided across pigments, and hands moved slowly to adjust sheets and materials. Every gesture contributed to the harmonious cadence, flowing naturally from one monk to the next, and from one manuscript to another. There was no rush, no urgency, only the steady, deliberate unfolding of work that existed in quiet balance with the room, the light, and the passing hours. Even as the night deepened, the scriptorium retained its sense of timelessness. Candles burned lower, casting a softer glow, while moonlight shifted slowly through the windows. The monks continued their meticulous work, dipping quills, moving brushes, aligning sheets, and observing details with quiet care. Each action flowed gently into the next, forming a continuous, almost meditative movement that wrapped the room in calm and stillness. The monks occasionally paused, lifting their hands to rest or glancing toward the high ceilings and the distant windows. These moments were subtle and unhurried, absorbed naturally into the rhythm of the scriptorium. The gentle motions, the interplay of light and shadow, and the quiet sounds of ink, brushes, and shifting parchment combined to create an environment where time seemed to slow, where attention was absorbed wholly into the careful, patient act of creation. In this way, the manuscripts continued to grow incrementally. Letters and pigments accumulated slowly, forming delicate, harmonious patterns across the pages. The monks' hands, guided by experience and attentiveness, moved with gentle precision, ensuring that each manuscript developed in a seamless, uninterrupted manner. The room itself seemed to embrace this rhythm, holding the gentle actions, the faint scents, and the soft light within a quiet, enveloping calm. The scriptorium had settled into a profound quiet, a gentle hush that enveloped every desk, manuscript, and flickering candle. The monks moved with calm attentiveness, their hands carrying quills and brushes through the measured space with unhurried grace. Each page they tended seemed to breathe with the careful accumulation of letters and pigments, the black ink forming soft lines while muted colors traced delicate embellishments along the edges. Shadows stretched lazily across the floor and walls, stretching and contracting with the faint flicker of candle flames, and the occasional shaft of moonlight added a cool luminescence that softened the warm glow within. A monk leaned slightly closer to a partially filled page, his fingers resting lightly on the parchment as he guided a quill across its surface. The letters formed slowly, steadily, each curve and line emerging with deliberate calm. Nearby, a small brush traced pale pigments across the margins, the color merging gradually with the text to produce quiet, harmonious details. Every motion was patient, every gesture part of a seamless rhythm that extended across the room. The soft, continuous sounds, the scratch of quills, the brush gliding through pigment, the gentle shifting of sheets, wove together into a subtle, almost imperceptible symphony of creation. The arrangement of desks and materials encouraged a smooth, uninterrupted flow of work. Manuscripts lay in careful stacks, sheets were aligned precisely, and tools were set within easy reach. Monks moved among them as if in a quiet dance, their gestures synchronized with the calm pulse of the room. Pauses were brief and unhurried, merely moments of observation or reflection before the hands resumed their steady rhythm. Each small adjustment, a tilted page, the dipping of a quill, the careful lift of a brush, blended naturally into the ongoing work, maintaining the soft cadence that defined the scriptorium. Candle flames flickered gently, their warm illumination reflecting off the textures of parchment, the subtle sheen of pigments, and the polished wood of desks. Occasionally, a gentle draft shifted a flame or lifted the corner of a page, but these movements were absorbed seamlessly into the quiet flow, unnoticed except as a slow, soft presence. The faint scent of wax, ink, and parchment mingled in the cool night air, a gentle reminder of the scriptorium's enduring atmosphere. Some manuscripts had progressed further, carrying several pages of careful lettering and small decorative motifs. One monk adjusted a sheet to align it perfectly, lifting a quill to check the consistency of a line of letters before continuing. Pigments were applied with measured patience, each stroke merging with the text so subtly that it appeared almost as if the colors had always belonged. The work was absorbing yet unobtrusive, each movement part of the quiet, unfolding narrative of the room. Shadows and light continued their slow, graceful dance across the scriptorium. Moonlight filtered through high windows, tracing faint patterns on stone floors and wooden beams, while candlelight added warmth to corners where pigments and quills were placed. Dust motes floated lazily in these shafts of light, drifting in silent arcs that mirrored the steady motion of the monk's hands. The gentle interplay of illumination and shadow created a tranquil environment in which time itself seemed to move at a softer pace. A monk lifted a small stack of completed pages, arranging them carefully before returning to his work. His fingers brushed lightly across the surfaces, feeling the texture of ink and pigment, noting the quiet rhythm established on each sheet. Pages were shifted, aligned, and set aside, contributing to an overall sense of order and calm that extended across the room. Every motion, no matter how small, was part of the uninterrupted continuity of work, maintaining the slow, deliberate pace that filled the scriptorium. The quills required occasional attention, sharpened and prepared to maintain their delicate precision. A monk took a small knife and gently trimmed a nib, testing it briefly on the edge of a sheet before returning it to the ink and continuing. Each letter that followed was produced with patient care, the ink flowing smoothly into the grooves of the parchment. Brushes were handled with equal attention, their soft bristles carrying pigments in measured, gentle strokes. The manuscripts themselves seemed to respond to the careful attention given to them. Pages once blank now carried lines of ink and soft illustrations, each element appearing naturally and gradually as if unfolding in harmony with the monk's hands. Stacks of partially finished sheets waited nearby, their edges aligned perfectly, ready to receive further attention without disruption. Every page was part of a larger, quiet process, each stroke a continuation of the previous one, contributing to the overall calm of the scriptorium. Even as the evening deepened, the room maintained its sense of timelessness. Candlelight softened, moonlight shifted slightly across surfaces, and shadows moved gradually in response to the subtle flicker of flames and the occasional movement of air. The monk's motions remained gentle and steady, each hand, quill, and brush following the measured rhythm of the space. Pauses were absorbed, small adjustments were incorporated, and the manuscripts continued to grow incrementally without haste or pressure. The scriptorium held a gentle harmony, where light, shadow, scent, and sound blended into a quiet whole. Each motion, every subtle change in the environment, was part of a continuous, enveloping calm. The manuscripts, the quills, the pigments, and the monks themselves existed in an ongoing flow, moving together through the quiet night. Every action contributed to the serene cadence, each moment adding to the gentle progression of work that filled the space with patient, unhurried rhythm. Within this slow, deliberate atmosphere, the manuscripts continued to take shape. Letters formed gradually, pigments settled softly, and every gesture merged into the overarching sense of calm. The monk's careful attention, the subtle variations of light and shadow, and the gentle, continuous movements of hands and tools created a room in which time seemed to stretch, expand, and breathe along with the rhythm of creation. The scriptorium had grown even quieter, the subtle flicker of candles now casting slower, softer shadows across the stone walls and wooden beams. The monks moved with calm deliberation, their motions more measured than ever, as if the rhythm of the night itself had merged with their hands. Each manuscript lay partially completed, pages carrying delicate lines of ink in muted colors that caught the dim candlelight and the cool glow of moonlight seeping through high windows. The interplay of light and shadow lent a gentle depth to every surface, creating a tranquil environment where every movement, however small, felt absorbed into the quiet cadence of the room. Hands lifted brushes, dipped quills, adjusted sheets, and traced letters with patient care. Each gesture extended seamlessly from the previous one, forming a continuous flow of activity that seemed almost meditative. The scratch of quills, the soft glide of brushes, and the faint rustle of parchment blended together into a hushed harmony that lingered in the still air. Even the faint shifting of candle flames added to the rhythm, their warm, trembling light complementing the steady, deliberate motions of the monks. Pages in progress carried intricate patterns, small illuminations that required a careful eye and gentle touch. Monks paused periodically to examine a line or a color, lifting hands to rest briefly before continuing. Their attention remained focused yet unhurried, guided by the subtle needs of the manuscript rather than any external pressure. Every adjustment, every delicate stroke, added incrementally to the quiet harmony that enveloped the room. The scriptorium's architecture lent itself to this unbroken sense of calm. High ceilings allowed the candle's soft light to diffuse slowly across the room, while stone walls absorbed and softened sounds, creating a gentle echo of movement and activity. Desks were arranged to allow free passage and unobstructed work, each surface carefully organized with quills, brushes, pigments, and stacks of parchment. Monks navigated this space with grace, each step, tilt, and reach blending naturally into the ongoing rhythm, a quiet dance of methodical care. In a corner, one monk added subtle washes of muted blue and ochre to the margins of a manuscript. Each stroke of pigment merged gently with the inked letters, the colors blending in a soft, natural harmony. His hand moved slowly, carefully, as though attuned to the pulse of the room itself. The surrounding monks continued their own measured tasks, the gentle coordination of all movements creating a seamless flow of sound, light, and texture. Shadows lengthened gradually, stretching across desks, floors, and manuscripts. Moonlight shifted imperceptibly, tracing arcs across parchment and illuminating small details of the decorative elements. Dust motes drifted in the beams of light, their silent, floating movements mirroring the unhurried pace of the monk's work. Candle flames flickered softly, casting reflections on polished wood and subtly textured parchment, adding layers of warmth to the cool glow of the night. The scent of ink, pigments, and aged parchment hung faintly in the air, a quiet presence that intertwined with the subtle sounds of creation. Every action, no matter how minor, was absorbed naturally into the calm of the scriptorium. Pages were aligned, quills lifted and dipped, brushes adjusted and moved, all forming a continuous, gentle rhythm. Even pauses, slight and unassuming, became part of the quiet symphony that filled the space. Some manuscripts now carried several completed pages, each one a testament to patience and care. Monks handled them delicately, shifting stacks and arranging sheets without disturbing the continuity of work. Every gesture maintained the flow, every action a continuation of the soft, unhurried cadence. The combination of motion, light, and scent wove together into an encompassing calm, wrapping the scriptorium in a sense of timeless ease. As the night deepened further, the quiet of the room seemed to expand. Candlelight softened even more, shadows blending into the gentle darkness, while moonlight traced long, pale shapes across the stone floors. Monks continued to work with gentle deliberation, each movement slow and considered, merging into the overall rhythm that defined the evening. Letters formed gradually, pigments settled softly, and every motion, brush, quill, or hand adjustment, was absorbed into the seamless flow of creation. The manuscripts themselves appeared to grow with the night, pages filled incrementally, their lines and colors blending in quiet harmony. Each stroke contributed to the patient accumulation of effort, and each monk's attentive, unhurried motion added to the overall rhythm of the space. There was no urgency, no rush, only the steady, enveloping cadence that moved through the room, allowing the manuscripts and those who tended them to exist fully in the present, fully in the calm of the evening. Even as the final hours of night approached, the scriptorium remained a place of gentle focus. Hands lifted and rested, quills traced letters, and brushes glided softly across pigments. Light and shadow continued their slow, subtle dance, dust motes floated in drifting arcs, and the quiet harmony of the monk's work persisted. Every element, the manuscripts, the tools, the motion, the scent, and the shifting light, formed a unified, calming rhythm that extended naturally into the approaching night. The scriptorium had entered the deepest stretch of the night, where candle flames flickered with the softest movements, barely disturbing the gentle shadows that played across walls, desks, and manuscripts. The room itself seemed to have grown quieter, as though the very air had settled into the rhythm of the monk's careful work. Pages, once blank, now held delicate letters and pale illustrations, each one a quiet testament to the patient progression of the evening. The faint gleam of pigments in the dim light gave a sense of softness, each color blending gently with the surrounding parchment, forming patterns that invited a calm, lingering gaze. Hands moved slowly and deliberately, lifting quills to trace letters that formed with measured precision, dipping brushes lightly into pigment and gliding them across margins with gentle attention. The monk's motions were quiet and fluid, absorbed in a rhythm that seemed to mirror the steady flow of the night itself. Every pause, every tilt of the wrist, every careful adjustment of a page merged seamlessly into the continuous cadence of creation. The subtle sounds of ink against parchment and brush against paper became a soft, ambient harmony that stretched across the room and extended outward, into the night beyond. The manuscripts themselves appeared to hold the gentle weight of hours, their pages filled with careful strokes and delicate flourishes. A monk leaned over a particularly intricate illumination, adding soft touches of color, the motions so subtle they seemed almost like a continuation of the ambient shadows. Another monk shifted a stack of completed sheets, aligning them neatly, the soft rustle of parchment barely audible against the quiet hum of the scriptorium. Each action was part of an unbroken flow, blending naturally with the movements of others and the slow passage of time. Candlelight and moonlight wove together across surfaces, producing a muted interplay of warmth and cool tones. Shadows deepened gradually, stretching and fading in response to the flicker of flames and the subtle shifts of air through the high windows. Dust motes drifted in slow arcs, their presence almost imperceptible, yet contributing to the sense of stillness that permeated the room. The textures of the parchment, the delicate colors of the pigments, and the soft sheen of ink reflected these changes in light, creating a sense of quiet depth that invited slow observation and gentle focus. The monk's hands moved with continued patience, each stroke a continuation of the previous, each page building upon what came before. Letters curved gracefully across the parchment, the ink settling into the grooves with a soft permanence, while pigments blended naturally into borders and illustrations. The rhythmic breathing of those at work added an unspoken continuity to the quiet scene, a shared pulse that moved through the room as seamlessly as the hands and brushes themselves. Even small pauses were absorbed into this rhythm, the moments of stillness as natural as the strokes that followed. Stacks of partially finished manuscripts rested in careful order, ready to receive the next touches of ink and color. The alignment of each page, the consistent spacing of letters, and the gentle curves of illustrations all reflected the slow, methodical care that had carried the work through the evening. Each page seemed to exist in a state of quiet completion and subtle anticipation, the room itself acknowledging the passage of time in hushed tones of shadow and light. A subtle draft occasionally shifted the edges of pages or caused the flames to lean briefly, yet these small movements were absorbed without disruption. The monk's work continued with the same gentle attention, each hand and quill responding to the needs of the manuscript with measured patience. The faint scent of ink and wax, mingled with the delicate aroma of aged parchment, hung softly in the air, a constant companion to the ongoing rhythm of creation. As the night stretched onward, the space seemed to expand around the monks, each surface, each manuscript, each brushstroke part of a larger, enveloping calm. Shadows softened and merged, candlelight glimmered gently, and moonlight traced faint, delicate patterns across the scriptorium. The manuscripts, quietly accumulating letters and muted illustrations, reflected the slow, unhurried pace that defined the room. Every page, every movement, every gesture contributed to the overarching harmony, an unbroken flow that moved naturally toward the stillness beyond. Even as the hours waned, the sense of calm remained unbroken. Each page completed or in progress became part of the quiet continuum, blending with the subtle shifts of light and shadow, the gentle motion of air, and the slow, deliberate rhythm of the monk's hands. The scriptorium existed in this soft, timeless moment, a space in which creation unfolded steadily, seamlessly, without urgency or conclusion. With the manuscripts gradually filling, candles flickering low, and moonlight painting the walls in pale, diffuse patterns, the night carried the monk's work gently forward. Every motion, every subtle shift of quill or brush, merged with the rhythm of the space, creating a serene cadence that seemed to stretch indefinitely. The scriptorium, the manuscripts, the light and shadow, and the quiet movements of hands formed a unified, enveloping tranquility, allowing the night itself to settle into a deep, untroubled calm. This quiet harmony, so subtly built over hours, now extended into a gentle silence that seemed almost infinite. The manuscripts rested with their softly traced letters and muted illustrations. Candlelight glimmered faintly, and the faintest movements of air and shadow passed through the scriptorium with the unhurried grace of the night itself. Time had softened, slowed, and folded into the rhythm of the monk's careful work, leaving the room in a state of quiet continuity, poised between creation and stillness, carrying naturally into the gentle conclusion of the evening. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down, let your thoughts drift where they want to go, and allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.